Welcome to a webinar in the Financial Abuse Awareness series. My name is Bill Mitchell. This series is part of the Financial Protections Project, co-designed by the Queensland Government, Caxton Legal Centre and Townsville Community Law. The series is an online continuing professional development program that aims to raise financial industry awareness about the financial abuse of older persons. Before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This presentation is number 5 of 7 skills modules, and it's about particular groups in society. These slides are not read verbatim, but they are paraphrased for emphasis. They are designed to be standalone, readable modules and contain references for deeper learning. So let's begin. Before we begin this module, let's take a moment to think about this statement. It's important for advisors to approach vulnerability and vulnerable older persons in a way that's sensitive to their lived experience, including any specific vulnerabilities they may face. The statement from Zanatino talks about those from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds who may be particularly vulnerable to financial abuse, or may have specific or distinct forms of oppression that they experience, or have particular issues that relate to their race and culture. This, of course, is just one example. Working with particularly vulnerable groups of older persons is complex because it calls on advisors to have an understanding of the diversity of experiences of older persons and the diversity of experiences of elder abuse. Advisors need the skill to identify and implement appropriate and adapted approaches for particular groups. Advisors can draw on elements of a meaning-centered approach, trauma-informed practice, and the applied ecological approach to meet the needs of a diversity of older persons. In the box on the right-hand side, you can see the learning outcomes for participants in this session. The first thing we'll talk about is using a meaning-centered approach. Advisors can use a meaning-centered approach when working with vulnerable older persons. This incorporates a range of characteristics. The first one is that the advisor is inquisitive and wants to engage with the older person as a humble knower and being genuinely curious about their worldview. Secondly, the advisor is collaborative. They engage with the older person in a reciprocal process of sharing knowledge and exploring meaning. Thirdly, the advisor is respectful and honours the diverse ways of knowing and being and creating a space for the voice of the older person to emerge. And fourth, the advisor is critical and engaging in critical self-reflection to cultivate an awareness of how social and cultural identity and various other interactions may be relevant to the older person's situation. Meaning-centered practice emphasises the need to better understand elder abuse, including financial abuse within particular contexts, and is particularly useful for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons. The second approach is a trauma-informed practice. Trauma-informed practice is a strengths-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impacts of trauma. Being trauma-informed is about supporting people to feel safe enough in their interactions with services, to build trust and to help people overcome their fear and sense of betrayal. It's not an end state but a process, and if you look at the Blue Knot Foundation, you can find lots of resources about how your practice or your organisation can become trauma-informed. There are 4 levels of trauma-informed service, and they're displayed on the screen now: trauma-aware, trauma-sensitive, trauma-responsive, and trauma-informed. There's some excellent resources about having conversations about trauma. And this is particularly important if you're dealing with older persons who have experienced personal, interpersonal, or any form of violence. The applied ecological approach is another approach that advisors can use to consolidate the various complexities of dealing with vulnerable persons. An applied ecological approach considers the risk factors of the individual, the perpetrator, their mutual relationship, and their respective positions within the community and society. It actually allows you to dip into the specificities of different frameworks, such as family violence and dependency. It reminds us that when we have individual interventions like the Financial Protection Service, where we are asking older people to change their behaviour, we mustn't place all the responsibility on that on individual service users. Here you can see the applied ecological approach in terms of the context of the individual. Advisors who are working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities should pay careful attention to their particular needs. The New South Wales Elder Abuse Toolkit suggests some very useful strategies for communicating effectively with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons. It's important that advisors need to understand that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons can be considered older at age 50 under many government policies, and they can also be eligible for aged care entry from that age. This reflects the significant gap in life expectancy. Also, we've talked about previously in this program about the context of the term elder, which doesn't necessarily imply that a person is older, but has a position of responsibility within their community or family. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons may have a range of different risk factors which can impact on them as older persons. If you view these factors from an applied ecological approach, it can help you fit your awareness into your approach. You can see there that there's a range of risk factors including historical and cultural, health and social and emotional well-being, and socio-economic. Just take some time now to look at those different factors and the sorts of things that impact, particularly on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons. Other important issues identified can be viewed within the meaning-centred and applied ecological approaches include that elder abuse can take different forms across different communities. They're not homogenous. Living in discrete rural communities means many people might know each other's business, and this can create family and community tensions. Tensions can shift from individual to individual and from family to family, and this can make seeking help more difficult for an older person living in an abusive situation. Knowing about these tensions are important. Additionally, elder abuse raises fear and concerns of being judged as an inadequate parent or grandparent by others. And for older persons living in remote and rural locations, this may make abuse more difficult to address. They may not want the community to know their family business, and they may be shamed about the abuse, so they keep it hidden, or even prevent it from being addressed when it becomes known. Family obligation in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is very important and may have both a positive and potentially a negative effect on the outcome of an intervention taking place. Loyalty towards family members and the fear of loss of family may also be a barrier to help-seeking behaviour. People of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background living in rural and remote communities may actually feel and be more isolated and challenged in seeking help as well. A lack of family support and community connections when living in metropolitan regions can also have the same effect and can mean abuse can go unnoticed. When having conversations around elder abuse, Australian services have used a range of different descriptions. Just take a moment to look at those different descriptions that have been used in the South Australian Department of Communities and Social Inclusion resource that's shown on the right-hand side. If you're working with cultural values, older persons from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, you need to appreciate that some cultures experience financial abuse differently. For example, in Korea, older people define financial abuse as not providing older persons with financial support. And neglectful behaviours will seem to be the most disrespectful. However, a key feeling of abuse across cultures is the sense of entitlement to the older person's money, usually by family members who feel they will inherit it anyway, and the older person no longer needs it. Also note that the prevalence of financial abuse can differ in different countries, and there's an example given on the right-hand side of the different prevalence in Asian countries. Working on best practice for dealing with elder abuse within cultural and linguistically diverse communities is important. Blundell and Clare noticed that families from cold backgrounds face different issues from those from English-speaking backgrounds. For example, there may be differing intergenerational attitudes about how an older generation should be cared for. This may be due to the older generation holding on to cultural beliefs from their countries of origin, while the younger generation has begun to accept values and beliefs more like those where they're living now. The definitions we use may also not resonate with older persons from cold backgrounds because of language issues. A lack of attention to culture is a major limitation in assisting older persons who are experiencing financial abuse. Older persons from different cultural backgrounds define, perceive and respond to financial abuse in different ways. Research on financial abuse in cold communities found that older non-English speaking Australians are not only at risk of being financially abused, but they may also deny it will ever happen to them. There's a preference among cold older persons to sort through the issues within the family and a reluctance to speak out. Many fear exclusion and abandonment from their family. For some of those cold older persons, they may feel that even if abuse is occurring, seeking outside help is not an option. They may lack confidence in government institutions and police due to previous negative experiences in their country of origin. Older LGBTIQ plus persons face typical challenges of ageing, including the possibility of elder abuse or domestic violence, in combination with the threats of discrimination and abuse about their sexual orientation or gender identity. It's very important that advisors take into account that older LGBTI persons are at high risk for elder abuse, neglect and exploitation. A fear of homophobia or transphobia may keep them from seeking help and services. Internalised homophobia or transphobia may affect an older LGBTIQ plus person's willingness to seek help and may actually put them at risk of self-neglect. And some older LGBTIQ plus persons choose to hide their sexual identity or gender identity. This can actually cause problems later on. Advisors need to be aware of the issues facing older LGBTIQ persons. Elder abuse of LGBTIQ persons has been called a hidden problem within a hidden problem. Some other points here: older LGBTIQ plus persons place high value on self-sufficiency and may be reluctant to accept help. There's a need to be sensitive to older LGBTIQ persons' lack of legal protections and other issues. It's been suggested some issues for working with this community include being aware of the lack of legal protections available. To make sure we use proper names and pronouns, that is, the ones used by the older person themselves, regardless of legal or biological identification. Connect and build rapport with older LGBTIQ plus persons by asking about their career, their profession, friends and personal effects. Listening is especially important. Be aware that not all coupled relationships are heterosexual. Be prepared to be able to connect with the older person to community resources for older LGBTIQ plus persons, should they desire. And they may also have close networks of friends that serve as a protective factor, although, as we've heard before, close social networks that have negative interactions can also be a risk factor. Here's an industry example which talks about the situation of LGBTIQ plus persons. It recognises there's been decades of inequitable treatment for LGBTIQ plus persons. Many LGBTI people have suffered stigma, family rejection and social isolation, and they have had a life experience of fear of rejection and persecution. Older members of faith communities may also be encountered by advisors, and it's important to be aware that there's a trusting relationship between faithful older persons and their faith leaders, and they may make disclosures of financial abuse to them more likely. Referrals to faith-based services or pastoral care can be sensitive and expedient. Faith leaders are in a special position to be able to offer spiritual and emotional help and guidance to victims. However, at times, members of faith communities may not take the step of recommending that older persons take action or seek help about financial abuse, and it's important to have a conversation with older persons about that possibility. It's also known that an older person may be less likely to fabricate a situation to a trusted member of the clergy, and so disclosures made to members of clergy tend to be more honest and open than they might be to a third party that isn't trusted. Advisors must be aware of care leavers who are older persons who spent time in care as a child. This could have been foster care, residential care or children's homes. Their care could have been provided by the state through a court order or voluntarily. More than 500,000 children were placed in institutional and out-of-home care under various arrangements. They're also called the Forgotten Australians, former child migrants and the stolen generation. Aged care is identified as an area of particular anxiety for care leavers. Their previous experiences of institutional care can really be concerning once they enter aged care. Care leavers are a good example of older persons who've experienced polyvictimisation and probably hybrid abuse. They may be reticent to report types of elder abuse, and they may fear authority figures and be reluctant to seek health and support services because of that past trauma and abuse in care. Before we leave, let's think about this statement from Caring from Forgotten Australians, former child migrants and stolen generations. Thanks for listening to this webinar series. Feel free to download the PDF file for future reference. The next module is number 6 of 7 in the skills module, and it's about responding to financial abuse. Thanks for listening.